right, so we ended our last video talking about the fourth substage of Piaget's sensory motor stage, right? So we talked about intentional goal-directed behavior. We've talked about object permanence. We will talk about now improved anticipation of events, right? So for example, with a child who's around 8 to 12 months, you can see behavior such as, for example, when we talk about anticipation of events. So an 8-month-old, right, seeing their mother put on a coat, right, will understand that she's about to leave, right? And might start crying as a result, might try to follow her, might try to crawl after her, right? So there is, anticipation of events that, the coat wearing means that the mother is about to leave, right? When a child is younger, this anticipation of events is not as developed. So one of the first things that you'll see is that, however, it is there, it is present to a certain degree. It's not as good as it gets around 8 to 12 months of age. For example, you'll see that, even with a 3-month-old child, for example, right? If they're crying and they're hungry, right? And the mother walks in the room, right? So they'll know that food is close, that she's about to give them milk, right? And they might stop crying as a result, right? So even though you see that there is, anticipation of events even at 3 months of age, it greatly improves by 8 months of age. Then you have, the imitation of novel behaviors as well. So imitation of behaviors that a child is not very familiar with, right? That is also something that is increasing as a child is becoming older. Now, what does that mean? For example, if they watch their mother, stirring with a spoon. So, for example, she's put sugar in her cup of tea, and she is stirring it with a spoon. So they might try to imitate this behavior as well. Now, this might be a novel behavior for them, but they might try to repeat it even after seeing it once, right? So that is something that is also improving in the cognitive domain, right? What else do we have? Now we move on to the fifth stage, which is tertiary circular reactions. So, we've moved from the secondary circular reactions and coordination of the secondary circular reactions to tertiary circular reactions. And this is when a child is between 12 to 18 months of age, right? What's happening here is that, you have exploration of the properties of objects by acting on them in novel ways. And you have imitation of novel behaviors, ability to search in several locations for a hidden object. Now, what does all of this mean? Let me break it down for you. This basically means is the first bit of it, which is the exploration of the properties of objects by acting on them in novel ways. So again, let's go back to the example of Rehan and how he drops different objects, and he's yet to turn 18 months, right? So he falls exactly within this substage. So when he's trying out all of these different objects, right, and throwing them with different intensities, right? So sometimes he just lets them drop, sometimes he throws them with great intensity, right? So, when he's varying his actions in such a way and then observing how they fall to the ground floor, right? So this is him. Basically, what he's doing is he's very actively experimenting with his environment, right? And this experimentation is exactly what is the key to this substage, that you're acting on the environment in novel ways and you're observing, what happens when you do all of these different things. You drop all of these different objects of different weights from the top floor and you look at what happens, right? So this experimentation is exactly what is being referred to in this substage, right? Then you have imitation of novel behaviors, right? So you might have, you see someone. I have another niece, and what she did was that a few days ago she saw me brushing my hair and she was very taken by it, right? And a few minutes later, as I put the hairbrush down, what I saw was that she also started trying to brush her hair, right? So that is also an example of a slightly, her following or her trying to imitate a much more novel behavior than what is possible before that stage, right? And then you have ability to search in several locations for a hidden object. Now, what does that mean? So we talked about object permanence earlier as well, right? In which what we said was that object permanence is basically this idea that objects continue to exist even if they're not inside, right? This understanding that objects continue to exist even if they are not inside. And we said that, children are able to understand this at a particular age when they're around 8 to 12 months. But basically, what we now see is that between 8 to 12 months, which is the substage that we considered earlier, their understanding is not complete. Now, why do we say that? We considered this example in which what we did was that we took a toy, right? And this is the kind of toy we had, and we hid it under a pillow. Now let's call this location A, right? So we hide this toy under location A, right? And we do it in front of the child, right? So now what the child does is that an 8 to 12-month-old child is able to recover this toy from behind the cushion, from behind this pillow, right? Now let's suppose what we do further is that we have another pillow here, right? Let's term this location B. Now in front of the child, this is very important, that in front of the child, we remove the toy from location A and we hide it under location B. Okay. Now what an 8 to 12-month-old child usually does is that even when they have seen the toy being moved from location A to location B, they still continue to search for it under location A because they have found it under location A earlier. So they still continue to search for it under location A, even though they have seen it being shifted to location B. And this is basically what led Piaget to believe that at this stage, even though there is evidence of object permanence, but the object permanence, the idea of it is still not complete. Right? Whereas a child who is 12 to 18 months, right? What they do not make this error. If you do this with a child who is between 12 to 18 months, that you hide this object under location A and you ask them where is the toy and they recover it from location A, and then you hide it behind location A and then you take it out and you hide it behind location B. So what a child of who is between 12 to 18 months will do is that they will look under location B. They will understand that the object has been moved when they have seen it being moved, right? So this is basically this basically led Piaget to believe that it is really at this stage that a child has truly attained object permanence, right? Because they are not making the A not B error. This is basically, this is called the A not B error. This propensity for the child to look under location A, even when they have seen the object being moved from location A to B, is what is called the A not B error, right? So when children cease making the A not B error, then we say that they have truly attained object permanence. Now we move to looking at the sixth substage, which basically takes us to this idea of mental representation, which is between 18 months to 2 years. And basically, this is where you have the internal depiction of objects and events as indicated by sudden solutions to problems, abilities to find an object that has been moved while out of sight. Right now, this is again very important. So here, when we were doing the A to B search and we were looking at the A not B search error, we always considered that this was happening in front of the child, that it was, the object was moved from location A to B while the child was looking, right? And then there's also deferred imitation and make believe play. Now, what exactly all of these are, let me break this down for you. When we try to look at mental representation, right, we look at two different kinds of mental representation. One of the first is images, and the other are categories. Now, basically, when we look at the content of, our mental life, they form these two different kinds of, two distinct kinds of groups. So the first is images. So for example, when we remember someone's face, it's because we have stored a particular image, right? When we remember what a particular location looked like, it's because we've saved a particular image of that place in our minds, right? Then the other is categories. So for example, we have this understanding of what a ball looks like. So whenever we see any new object that looks like a ball, we say that this is a ball, right? Or that we have an understanding of, for example, what, let's suppose, a computer looks like, right? So whenever we see a new computer, we know that it is a computer, right? So we have this idea of categories, and this makes us basically much more efficient in terms of thinking, right? Um, Now, what does this have to do with how children are growing? Now, basically, what we see is that, children who are 18 months and above, right, they have learned to represent the world mentally to a certain extent, in the sense that they are beginning to really think, right, and solve problems in, a way that is different from the trial and error method. Rather, what they're doing is that they're not trying to solve problems by a and error method. Rather, what they're doing is that they're thinking about things. So, for example, the book gives an example of how an 18-month-old, right, she was trying to, she was playing with her toy car, right? And she kept sort of moving it against a wall, right? And whenever it would hit the wall, it would stop moving. And she just paused for a second and she thought, and then she turned it around and then she started moving it. So she had figured it out basically that, it would not be possible for her to, play with that car or have it, move in that direction because it would keep moving against that wall, right? So what basically children who are 18 months and above, what they're able to realize is what they're able to do is that they're able to solve problems inside their heads. राइट तो अभी तक ये चीज आपने नहीं देखी थी in all of the sub stages that you have considered. You basically had that the children are interacting with their environment, they're experimenting with their environment, but they're not, up till now, they were not solving problems inside their heads. So this is something that is new to this sub stage, right? What else is new? Another thing, so basically what you have is that you have sudden solutions to problems, and basically a sudden solution, what that shows you is that it's not trial and error. Rather, it's because this child has thought about, what is happening, and that's why they have decided to act in this particular way. Um, Again, that example of the 19-month-old who suddenly decides, who pauses and then suddenly decides to move her car away from the wall, is because she has realized, she has mentally understood that the car will not be able to move in that particular direction, right? Then you have ability to find an object that has been moved out of sight, has been moved while out of sight, right? So that again is something that is very, very important because that shows that, this child, if you, for example, that they were able to remember, you know, if you tell them, let's suppose that, I removed your toy and I put it there under a particular location, right? And they're able to find it, that means that they were also able to remember a particular sequence, right? That they're supposed to, go to this particular location and find the toy there, right? So that also is evidence of cognitive development, right? Then you have deferred imitation and make-believe play. Now, those, both of these things are kind of interrelated as well, and they're extremely important as well, right? So deferred imitation, what that means is, so till now you have had, imitation of familiar behaviors or unfamiliar behaviors, right? But you haven't had deferred imitation. And what deferred imitation basically means is that, I gave you an example that I was brushing my hair in front of my niece. Now, let's suppose she did not copy that behavior then, but, let's suppose a day passed and then she got hold of that brush and she got an opportunity to use that brush, right? So deferred imitation is basically when a child copies a behavior after a certain amount of time has passed, right? So this is basically what deferred imitation is, right? That, and this also again requires that the child is able to mentally represent that action, and that is the only way that they're able to imitate it or they're able to play out this behavior later as well, right? Then you have make believe play, which basically involves that, when children pretend that they are the mother or they pretend that they are a shopkeeper, right? So this also obviously also involves, deferred imitation, that they watch a shopkeeper, they see how they behave, and then they come back home and they try to imitate that behavior, right? So make believe play is also something that's very, very important when you consider children's cognitive development, and basically when you look at how well they're able to represent the world around them. So basically this is what Piaget's sensory motor stage is, and this is what Piaget believed. This is, the direction of development according to Piaget. Right, I'll just erase this so that you can see this better. Now, not everyone agrees with this, and there's a lot of research which sort of contradicts some of Piaget's claims, right? So when we consider, I'll give you one example of the study, which is extremely interesting, which claims, right? So this study claims to have found evidence for object permanence in children who are something like 2.5 to 3.5 months of age, right? So they claim that they found evidence of object permanence in infants as young as 2 to 3 months of age. Now, let me show you how they did that. And they did that through a procedure that we've talked about earlier as well, which is habituation, right, and recovery. So basically, habituation is this process in which what you do is that you expose a child to a particular stimulus, right? And so, for example, the child looks at that particular stimulus, but then they stop looking or they stop taking an interest. So you say that the child has habituated to this particular stimulus. Now, that could be anything. That could be a picture, let's suppose, right, of a carrot. It could be a particular toy. It could be anything, right? Then you have the other concept, which is that of recovery. Now, recovery is that if, for example, you show a child another stimulus, right? So first you showed them a carrot and they looked at it, but then eventually they stopped looking at it, right? So you say that the child is habituated. Then you showed them the picture of a candy, right? Now, this is another stimulus, right? So a child will again start looking at this, they'll again start taking an interest in this, and you say that they have recovered to this new stimulus, right? Make sense? Now, having laid this out, let us look at this research. Now, what the researchers did was that they exposed these 2 to 3 month old infants to, firstly, this habituation event, right? Which was basically that what they did was that they showed the children, there's this screen here, right? In the sense that it's not, it's not an iPad or a phone screen. It's basically this cover. That's what they mean, right? And what they did was that they took a carrot, right? And what they did was that they passed the carrot from behind the screen, right? And then they and then they showed the carrot coming out from the other corner of the screen, from the right hand corner, right? And here's the carrot. So, infants looked at, this event, and then they showed them another event, which was that there's a tall carrot, right? That's moving behind the screen, and then it comes out from the screen. So, they habituated them to both of these different events. What that means is that they showed them these events until the children stopped looking, or their looking time declined, right? Then what the experimenters did was that they exposed them to these test events, right? Now, one of those events was the expected event, and the other was the unexpected event. And what researchers wanted to find out was that which of these events, the expected event or the unexpected event, do children recover to? Do they, give more attention to, right? What event do they look at longer, right? That's what researchers wanted to look at, right? So the expected event, and what they sort of modified in these events, was that they cut a hole in the screen, right? So they cut a hole in the screen. And what they did was, with the short carrot, when the short carrot moved behind it, obviously they saw nothing, right? And this is the expected event, that because the height of the carrot is so short that, infants were not expected to see anything, even if, the carrot was moving behind the screen. And the other test event was with the tall carrot. Now here with the screen, you would expect to see some bit of the carrot moving behind the screen, because you would have, at least this much of the carrot, which would be visible, right? Not to mention the green leaves here, right? I should have drawn the leaves in green. All right, let's forget about that. All right. Yes, so we can correct this. Right. So, this would be the expected event with the tall carrot, but it was unexpected. This is something that normally would not be there. And what you wanted to see was that would children look longer at this event, or would they look longer at this event? If they looked longer at this event, then that meant that, they didn't really notice a difference between these two. But if they looked longer at this event, then that meant that they felt that something was wrong, that something was amiss, that they should have seen the tall carrot, right? That, somehow this event violated some kind of physical laws, right? And this is what the experiment showed, that children did look longer at this event, at the unexpected event. And researchers claimed that this showed that they had some idea of object permanence, that they believed that even if the carrot was moving behind the screen, and if there was a hole in the screen, then they should have seen the carrot. That they had this understanding that even behind the screen, the carrot did continue to exist, and therefore researchers believed, or they claimed, that they had found evidence that infants who are as young as 2 to 3 months of age, they can, or they have some understanding of object permanence, right? Now, there's a lot of argument over this as well, because, other researchers sort of say that, this looking time is not a great indicator of whether children really do understand object permanence or not. And that, why is it that if they do have this idea of object permanence, they're not able to find an object that is hidden in front of them, why they're not able to recover it. So there's a lot of controversy regarding this, but this is, at the end of the day, a very, very interesting research, which really shows us something that, Piaget's theory and everything that he understood about children's abilities during the sensory motor stage, it might not be the true picture, that children might know something more than what Piaget gave them credit for, right?